All right. Okay, thank you everybody for joining us, and we apologize for a short delay there. So welcome to the fourth live stream in this series on ADHD. And just a reminder that this is a safe space for open and honest discussions about ADHD, which is a condition that affects millions of people worldwide. So we want to provide some valuable insights, share some personal experiences, and also create a supportive community for those impacted by the condition. And it's all in honor of ADHD Awareness Month, which is October. So, this last week we explored organization and concentration, and this week we will be discussing sensory overload, emotional regulation or dysregulation, and rejection sensitivity. So, first of all, sensory overload can be a common experience for those with ADHD, where lights seem a lot brighter, sounds seem a lot louder, and textures can really rub us up the wrong way. And people with ADHD can suffer from sensory overload and can also seek sensory stimulation at other times. In terms of emotional regulation or dysregulation, so emotions are often more keenly felt. They seem a little bit more extreme for many people with ADHD, whether those are positive or negative emotions, and emotional experiences can change rapidly from moment to moment. Some people with ADHD struggle to articulate what they're feeling and why that is. And emotional dysregulation can lead to inappropriate responses triggered by strong emotions, and an inability to self-soothe, and the inability to refocus attention from something that's emotionally very provocative or strong. And finally, rejection sensitivity or rejection sensitivity dysphoria. This is extreme emotional sensitivity and pain, which is triggered by the perception that someone has been rejected or criticized. It can also be triggered by a sense of sort of falling short, failing to meet their own high standards or other expectations. And studies show that 99% of people with ADHD do experience rejection sensitivity. So before we start exploring these areas, discussing mental health and neurodevelopmental disorders can be triggering for some. So we encourage you all to prioritize your mental well-being during this stream. And if you do feel overwhelmed at any point, please don't hesitate to step away, seek support from a trusted friend or family member or mental health professional, and use the available resources in your community. We'll also be sharing resources at the end of the session. So thank you for joining us today. Let's get started. We have with us Natasha. We know, Natasha, you've taken part in these live streams before, but for people who are just meeting you, could you give us a brief introduction?
So I'm Natasha. I'm currently based in the UK, but previously spent most of my life living out in different parts of Asia. I am a former ELT teacher. I am a teacher trainer, and but what I do more now is I work on wellbeing and safeguarding for another NGO. So my work is all connected around this and also the safeguards that we put in place to keep people safe and taking into account any neurodivergence. But yeah, my background is teaching, so I'm here on both sides of that for everyone.
Super. Thank you so much, Natasha. And JPB, an introduction from you. You were with us last week, but if anybody missed this.
Yeah. Hi, Higby Gerald. I have ED in instructional leadership. My main job is in a nonprofit, I guess, NGO, depending on what country you're in. I do sort of education management. I'm in charge of a large professional development program. I do the curriculum and all that, and sort of try to build up our instructional strengths. I also adjunct to teach pre-service or early career teachers, mostly because I enjoy teaching and not because I need to. And I write books and stuff. And one of those books, that the next book will be about neurodivergence and students of color, and that how it looks different for us to some extent. So that's me.
Okay. Great. Thank you. And thank you both for being here. And of course, I'm with Lottie Galpin, my co-host. Lottie doesn't need much of an introduction to many people watching, but Lottie, if you could briefly introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Lottie. My pronouns are she and her, and I was an ELT teacher. I then moved into ELT publishing, and now I work mainly with publishers, helping them to make their materials more inclusive and representative of a diverse range of identities, rather than the ELT norm.
Brilliant. Okay. And I'm Sarah. I'll be asking most of the questions today, I think. I'm based in Athens. I'm primarily a teacher trainer. I work in teacher education with my colleague C Steele, and you can check us out on Eltonics if you're interested in what we do. Anyway, today's topic is quite heavy, so thank you for participating. Some of these questions might be a little bit personal. Please remember, you don't have to answer what you don't feel up to answering. So the first thing that I want to talk about is sensory overload, whether you experience it, what triggers it, and maybe how you deal with it in the moment as well. Does anybody want to go first? Natasha?
Yeah, I'm happy to go. I think I personally experience sensory overload, but I also experience sensory underload. So I think it's important to point out it can be both things. So all I can say about sensory overload, and I think the best way to describe it is, when you have a tiny stone in your shoe that's rubbing against your toe. But imagine feeling that all over your body. So everywhere is covered with this tiny little thing that irritates you. Like when you've got a tag caught in the side of your jumper that you haven't quite taken out properly. But it gets to the point that it's so frustrating you can't think about anything else. And I've had it in supermarkets where there are children screaming, where there are lights going on, where there's noises, where there's smells. And actually the only thing for me to get out of it is to find a quiet space, to be on my own, to breathe through it. But exactly on the other way, if I'm not stimulated enough, I can't get anything done, which is something that I don't think is always talked about as well. So I'm someone who I've studied a lot, and or even when I'm working in my day-to-day work, if it's quiet, I can't study. I have to have the TV on, I have to have music, I have to have all parts of my brain occupied for one part of my brain to function properly. So I need that level of stimulation and overstimulation sometimes.
It's a
as
weird
well as not
contradiction,
enjoying
isn't
it.
Yeah, because on the one
Yeah.
hand, you're kind of saying, and I totally get the experience that too much noise, or for me it's lights. It's really really bright lights. I can't deal with that. It's too much, right? And that sends you somewhere. You kind of go into a sort of shutdown. But on the other hand, nothing at all feels awful as well. There's some kind of middle ground that we're searching for, kind of thing, Natasha.
It is that balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think
do you? Mm-hmm.
in terms of when I'm teaching, things that when you are teaching, and I use a lot of background music just to provide a hum. Even if we're doing straightforward things, just having a hum in the background can actually create that balance of not being irritating. We're not talking, techno EDM blasting out, but just having yeah, I've seen teachers do it, but just having something that's quite soothing, to create that balance. But yeah, it is really, and it's very personal as well. So I know someone who ticking clocks drives them to the point of they're going to smash the clock, because it could be the quietest noise that no one else will hear, but to them it's a hammer going into their head each time the clock ticks. So it can be really small things, it can be really big things, and
right.
a personal balance, really. It's not something I think we can give advice on, rather just examples of how we've dealt with it.
As well. But it's interesting how you say that this triggers a kind of emotional response, right? It's
very strong.
Yeah. And JPB, do you have the same sort of triggers or sensory overloads as Natasha's just described, or does it look a little bit different for you?
I mean, it's interesting that you chose all three of these topics because they're all kind of really closely tied together, obviously. I mean, you chose it for a reason, because I would say that For a lot of my life, probably a lot of what I was doing socially was either a reaction to or trying to prevent rejection. And that obviously, as a man, can come off really, that could be scary rejection. I'm not talking about that. I mostly mean friends, right? Like, for whatever reason, never really bothered me when I was rejected romantically. I mean, I wasn't like happy about it. I wasn't like, yay, but it didn't have the same emotional impact. I mean, obviously, if I was really innocent. Whatever. The point is, it was really my friends or people who were close to me in other ways. Not like being turned down for a date or something. So trying, like, now when I was an adult and I learned that that was the case, it made things a lot easier for me, because then it became me working with the rejection sensitivity and saying, like, oh, I'm not going to let it get to me now that I know what it is, right? And I've been much better, some of it's maturity and age and so forth, and then, like, I don't genuinely don't care as much about what people think of me these days. But you can't just decide not to care. You have to be in a position where it just doesn't matter that much, right? I do care of that people respect me, whether it's my identity and all that, but I'm not as concerned with people liking me. And sort of paradoxically, now they like me more now they don't care about it, which is interesting. But anyway, as far as the first two with the emotional dysregulation and the sort of sensory overload, I mean, yeah, it's like Natasha said, it's sort of if I'm just making up numbers here, I gotta stay in between like a 3 and a 7 in terms of the stimulation, except for obviously rare periods, right? If I go to a party and I'm just like, it's my party, then I don't really care if it's 10 or something. But I just mean, like, I gotta keep it in between the 3 and the 7 in terms of stimulation levels. Maybe it's more 2 and 8. And if I'm able to do that, then I'm not as affected by perceptions of rejection, nor am I as affected by the emotional regulation. Because emotional regulation and dysregulation is always a reaction to something. It's not just random, for me, at least.
Yeah.
It's not like a roller coaster that's just happening for no reason. It's a reaction, usually, to a perception of rejection, not always, or something. Because I don't get emotionally dysregulated when I'm looking out the window, like I am now, like in a whatever. But like in my relationships with people or things like that, that's what was always the strongest trigger. There are sounds that drive me up the wall, but I just sort of, we talked about this last week, but if I listen to podcasts or music or something, I'm able to just sort of not think about it. I really hate whispering. I can't, like, just talk or go somewhere else. Like, I just like, people think it's polite, but then all I just hear, I'm just like, stop, please stop that. And it was a big problem at my last job, because people would understand that, and I have a whole loud conversation at their desks, but then, like, but I'm just like, and I had to tell people not to whisper, and then they were confused. I'm sorry, you want me to be louder? And I'm like, I would rather you be louder, and then I can choose to listen or ignore you,
right,
than the whisper. So there are particular sounds that drive me up the wall, but
it's interesting how you talked about all these three aspects, because sensory, if we just come back briefly to sensory overload, we all experience it differently. Like you mentioned whispering. For me, it's the sound of people eating, and I can see that Saskia, who's joining us in the comments today, says exactly the same. I just can't. Or it's the sound of my poor dog cleaning himself. When he does this, I'm like, I can't. But my cat cleaning himself is fine, so go figure. I don't know how that works. Whatever. Anyway, but this kind of, as you say, from that, this emotional dysregulation can emerge, right? Because you've got the input, whether that's sensory or whether that's, and we'll get on to rejection sensitivity in a minute, whether that's a criticism or something somebody says or whatever, and then the emotional reaction is really very strong. Have you experienced this kind of not fully being in control of your emotions? I mean, you don't have to give specific examples, but is it something that you kind of resonates with you? I'll go back, Natasha, to you.
I think, I mean, I have experienced, I've lashed out at people. I've caused people to cry. People that are very close to me, my family, my bosses, people I've worked with. And it's often not because of what they're saying, but in the 2 days leading up to what was said, I wasn't in a zone where I was able to regulate myself, or people caught me at a moment where my head's completely taken up with something else. And I think, when for those of us that have ADHD, when we're talking about a noise or something, it's not just a minor irritant or annoyance. It drives our rage. It is a rage response. And I think that's really important to say. It's not, oh, I really dislike something. It eats away at our core. It's
Yeah.
something so much more than disruption. It really is central inside us. And so anything that happens following that or during that is a very irrational,
Yeah.
non-proportionate response. And that's
Yeah.
what makes it different to other people without ADHD, and their response to an irritant is the over reaction to something. And it can be as big as snapping at someone, or
Yeah.
it can
Yeah.
be, I know however many times I have just gone so mad with stuff that's going on at work that my first thought is to throw my laptop out of the 24th floor
Oh,
balcony. But
totally. I
the
mean,
difference is, I could actually do that rather than just think it.
yeah, this is
That's the
it. And
difference.
yeah, I'm not laughing at you here, Natasha.
Oh,
I'm
I get
laughing with
it.
you because, yeah, I'm totally with you on this. I think this is the key. I mean, I think everybody experiences these, irritants, for example, sound, senses, smells, whatever it is. But it's the emotional reaction that looks irrational to those who are watching or those who are with us. And yeah, we can then cause, it can hurt relationships, absolutely. And it certainly has, for me as well. And it does feel then very hard to bring back bring it back to kind of control within your control. I don't know about you, but once I hit that moment where I really want to launch my phone or my laptop, and like you, I'm perfectly capable of doing it. It takes a long time to bring it back. JPB is, if we go then to you were speaking more about rejection sensitivity, that can also cause extreme emotional responses and actual kind of pain, right? It's painful, this kind of thing. Can you kind of describe as best as you can what it is or what it looks like for you? Because this is something that we get a lot of questions about, I think.
I mean, I think when I was younger, a lot of it was I felt pretty isolated, and it's a cycle, right? Because if you respond the way Natasha's describing, which I also have, people don't want to hang out with you. So then they really do reject you, right? You perceive they reject you, and then you get angry about things, and then they're like, what's wrong with him? And then they actually do reject you. And legitimately, if you're treating them that way, they probably should. So when I was younger and I was like 15, I was really lonely a lot of the time, and that I'm not saying it ended when I was 15, but what happened is when I was in college, when I was in high school, I took a lot of long walks by myself, just listening to the radio and stuff like that. And that's when I felt the pain. I felt very alone. And when I got to college, I said, this is not happening anymore. So I basically, in a not particularly mature way, decided I'm never going to feel this again. And I would keep being active and doing stuff. So I never had to sit in how I felt. That doesn't mean that I felt great. It just means that I was basically not. I was just bouncing around and kind of not feeling in a lot of ways, So, but I was always, I had a hair trigger, and I'm not saying I was out there murdering people, but I just mean in the sense that I could yell, I could say a lot of mean things to people. The bad part about it is that, like, I was pretty funny. Like, the mean things I said were pretty funny, and then people actually started liking those things. So I said them more often, even if I wasn't necessarily mad. I was like an insult comic, right? And because I wanted to be accepted, I said them more often, And it took me until I was older to realize that's not a great way to build relationships, right? And so I kind of distance myself from a lot of people who like that about me, because if they like that about me, then that's probably not who I really want to spend my time with as an adult. And it led to some friendship breakups where I was like, I'm trying not to be like that anymore. And if that's what about me you liked, then either you come with what I'm trying to do now, or you don't. So anyway, I'm not staying on the topic. This is an ADHD conversation, so that's not really surprising. But when it comes to this, a feeling of pain, it's almost like, and I don't know if this is literally true. Like if you put a monitor on me, if this was actually true about my heart, but like if it would feel like my chest was getting tighter, right? And that was always the anticipatory feeling before I would get to the pain. And once I got that anticipatory feeling, I would either lash out or do something else or whatever, because it was almost just, I almost like literally couldn't deal with how I felt when I was 15. So I just like, I'm not gonna let it happen again. And I would just go do something ridiculous to not be thinking about it. And then as I got older, I realized, even before the diagnosis, I started to remove things that would make those things more likely. Because I do think for most people, and this is not just an ADHD thing, rage feeds on itself, right? If you are expressing it, you're more likely to continue to express it, right? I mean, there's a difference between like going and punching a punching bag to get some stress out and then you feel better, because that's a plan, right? But like if you're just releasing rage at people, you get comfortable doing it, right? And so there were always going to be times when I felt additional stress, because that's life. It's not just an ADHD thing. Those things are going to happen. And what I needed to do was remove the triggers or the potential causes, so that whatever regular means, mundane things didn't lead to it. And then when legitimately upsetting things would happen, I would also not be quite as upset as I would have been, because it was more like I would blow my top for mundane things, and then for really upsetting things, I would just go even higher, right?
Right.
So I wanted to turn the temperature down on everything. And now, I'm not saying I don't get mad, but I'm just saying it's a lot easier to control. And the problem, of course, is that there are environments where I don't have control over these things, and that's harder. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and this experience of rage being so kind of all consuming, I think this then leads to the kind of shame spiral, right? Because you let it out in a way that you really don't want to let it out, maybe on someone, really close to you, because that's what we tend to do, what many people tend to do. It's often in our closer relationships, and then we feel really, really intense guilt about having done that. And then we feel shame, and then we feel this rejection, and then there's just this endless cycle of sort of more negative emotions. I think if we look at it in children as well, it can just look like explosions that seem to come from nowhere. But there is a deeper cause to it, and learning to cope with that, I think, is a really hard aspect of having ADHD, especially if you're not diagnosed, because you don't really know what's going on. And it's not quite depression, it's not quite anxiety, it's something else where the emotions are kind of coming out. Lottie, I'm aware I haven't asked you anything yet. I know you've been busy moderating the comments, but do you want to add anything before we move on to explore maybe rejection sensitivity in more detail?
No, I'm just thinking about, I totally identify with everything everyone's saying. But I also think, to a degree, a lot of what we do is about repressing that rage and irritation. And I think that in itself can be very negative and kind of all consuming if it doesn't go somewhere productive, like JPB saying about, going and punching a punch bag, or, going and meditating. I'm wondering how, whether we can suggest any ways that we can manage that without sort of repressing it, and what can kind of happen if we do repress those feelings of rage. Was that a clear question?
I mean, it doesn't work, right? The repression, it doesn't work. It's just, it might work for, if it's a moment and it's like 2 minutes and you simply have to keep it together for a second, yeah, I can usually do that because I know it's going to end shortly, right? Like if I'm in like a tense moment, and I guess just mature enough, and again, there is medication that I take, although it's not ADHD medication, where like, I pause before the feeling and I'm able to just sort of hold on for a second. But as a long-term strategy, that does not work because it's gonna come out somewhere, And I have spent a lot of time. It's probably like if I sat down and thought about it, all the stuff I do so that it doesn't happen, because it really doesn't hardly happen anymore, um, is a lot. I run every day. I work out every day. The endorphins from that I start every day with, mean that when I start the day, I've accomplished something. I build in breaks into my work day. I just put it on my calendar at work, and I'm like, leave me alone. But then I have to like, what am I going to do during it? I'm not just going to sit here, right? So I plan something where I can get thoughts out, right? And a lot of the writing I do is about this. But again, I'm not as angry anymore, so there's not a lot of angry writing. But I just have to do a lot to get the junk out of my head now. And in the past, when I didn't have like, because I have a lot of outlets now, and I have to make use of them every day. I can't say if I missed a day, it would all come back. I've done enough work over the last several years, where like it probably would take a while to fall apart again. But yeah, it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a lot of maintenance that we got to do just to, and we've already spoken, I think, last week and so on, about the maintenance that we've got to do just to concentrate and get organized. So you add extreme emotions to this, and we're constantly juggling, right? Natasha, did you want to add something there in terms of like coping mechanisms that help you or people that you know?
Yeah, I also wanted to add that actually this is one of the diagnostic criteria is rage, and that often it is misrepresented in women in particular because we do internalize that rage rather than externalize it. And what that means is there are higher incidences of diagnosis of anxiety, depression, higher rates of self-harm, because that rage is turned onto your body rather than someone else's, and it's a dangerous cycle. So whilst repressing it isn't good, internalizing it also isn't good. And part of the issue with having ADHD is it's not that one thing that you're raging about. That you cannot make a boundary between what's in front of you and everything else that's happened in your life. And that leads into that emotional dysregulation and the rejection sensitivity, because you don't question that one thing that happened or that one piece of feedback that you got or that one noise that you can hear. It's everything. I'm a complete failure and my life is worthless. And that feeling, I can tell you, is so much to bear and to carry. And like JP, I'm there with the breaks and booking things in. I have to make sure I have regular leave from work. I can't work for too many weeks in a row without a long weekend. I need an extra day. I do condensed hours now, so I always have Friday afternoons off. Depending on workload, there are some exceptions. But also, as well as exercise being fantastic, exercise wasn't for me, but looking at creativity and a lot of those self-harm alternatives like elastic band snapping, like drawing on yourself, positive messaging on straight direct onto your body is soothing. Creating something, doing something with your hands, it's distraction techniques, and it is distraction, but they soon become part of, I will do this and it will soothe me. Gardening for me is another one. Even though my plants die and then I get upset and the cycle starts again, but at least for a few weeks, there's something. So it's all about it's creativity and being outside of your head and using your body in a productive way can be positive.
And if we bring this into the classroom, then like you've touched on some kind of key words there as educators, right? Allowing students to be creative, right? Not these book bound right wrong answers kind of thing. Allowing students to doodle and play around and draw, and whether that's on themselves or whether it's on the bit of paper. I mean, all of this kind of really helps get, having those brain breaks, getting up and moving, and all of that kind of stuff is really very helpful. And it's interesting also how you've managed your time, Natasha, to be able to take that day off. That's the afternoon off, to have an extended weekend, and that's something that really employers should be thinking about. Well, for everybody first and foremost, but particularly if you've got an employee with ADHD, then that's really key to have those extended break times. So some really great ideas there. And of course, then touching on things like sort of stigma, how certain people with ADHD are less able to express rage because of how society views that, whether you're identify as female, whether you're queer, whether you are a person of color, all of this kind of stuff can also make us mask or internalize rage, which then, as you say, leads to some really bad stuff, right? Things like self-harm and so on. JPB, I was wondering if you wanted to comment on that.
I know. I mean, I was lucky enough never really to get into self-harm, although I certainly did self-medicate. Let's put it that way. But which is not. I mean, it's kind of self-harm too, right? But it's not quite classified the same way, depending on how much. I never really got to a bad place with that. But anyway, as you just sort of touched on, obviously, as a person who's socialized, I'm a man. It's more acceptable to be angry, but on the other hand, that's one of the only emotions we're allowed to have. So it was much harder to break out of the cycle of it. But then at the same time, you sure can't be an angry black man in public. So I was not, like I said, when I was angry, again, I was mostly just insulting people. Not that it was okay, but I was not doing stuff with my fists in public or anything like that. Not only am I a pretty small person, but also like it didn't even cross my mind that would make be a good idea. And I'm not saying that people who do that think it's a good idea, but I also know to because I'm sure part of this should be also like, so what do we do, right? Because we all like, how do we get through this? And honestly, it's sort of sad what I'm going to say because it's such a boring answer. But all this got much easier for me when I got to a point where I was successful. Like a lot of there's still a little, come on, man, you can't do anything. But like there's a bunch of public proof that I can point to. It's out there. I wrote a book.
Yeah.
Successful. I got a doctorate, right? Like all those things, what Natasha's talking about, writing on the heart. Like if I can look at the diploma that says I have the doctorate, and I'm the first one in my family to do that, right? It helped. That's a lot of work to have to do for such a thing.
Right.
And then also it just happens that at the exact same, like all in 20, I got diagnosed late 2021. And in the course of 2022, I finished and released the book. Not quite in this order. Obviously, I finished the book before I released it. But finished and released the book. I graduated. I got a new job that I am both good at and enjoy. And I started taking, sort of emotional medication at the very end of the year. So in about a 6-month period, I came to a place really that I can't even see how it would fall apart now. The career stuff. I mean, I have to go out there and do something terrible, right? And I don't worry so much about masking now. Not only am I just too old to be doing that, but also like if you are going, my work is respected enough, both my work and my academic work and just the way I do things is respected, not in spite of how I do things, but because of how I do things.
Right.
And that switch from in spite to because of made all the difference for me. So I can't tell people, go find yourself a perfect career and get a doctorate and you'll be fine. And also write a book at the same time as your dissertation. Like that's a lot of work. Mind you, I have a toddler. So it's just like.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say. And a dog.
Yep.
But it's interesting though, and again, Natasha, Lottie, you might be able to say a bit on this as well. But I think sometimes the thing that develops alongside of all this, I mean, considering we search to achieve, and it's a little bit against the odds in some ways, right? Because we've got so many issues with our executive function skills and so on. So being able to achieve that first and foremost is fantastic, because schools, universities, and so on are not really always set up for people with ADHD, right? So we've got to fight a little bit harder that way. But these kinds of milestones or achievements can, I guess, really, really sort of be a kind of confirmation that, hang on, I'm doing all right. And as you say, it's the because of part. That's something that I think we're going to explore a little bit more next week as well, in terms of what people with ADHD bring to the table, in fact, right? There's a lot of stuff that we do bring, things like, create, we can go on, but we'll talk about that next time. On the flip side, on the flip side of that, though, is the rejection. Okay, so this perception of rejection. So we might have these external validation and so on, but sometimes we might get a comment which is perceived as critical. That could be professional, personal, whatever. It could be, I don't know, I'm just thinking of my day to day, showing somebody something that you made and they go, oh yeah, it's not bad. You go, what? And that's perceived, like a huge thing. It's not bad equals it's not good either. So, oh my God, I'm a failure. I think we also then tend towards these kind of perfectionist streaks, perhaps as a result of that, or people pleasing, trying to help everybody, or be the best that we can be for everybody. It's a ton of pressure that results. Lottie, you're nodding, so I'm gonna pass on to you. In terms of kinds of things that you might perceive as a rejection, or that can trigger this rejection sensitivity, what might they be? Perhaps not just for you, but for people that you know.
Oh, wow. I mean, God, I'm really, so as you say, a comment that isn't 100% 100% positive, that isn't even excessively positive, could be viewed as a criticism, the saying that there's something flawed. But also it could be, I don't know about anyone else, but I find with my RSD that it also has an effect on how I operate within the world. So I'm almost looking for it, and you kind of end up with this sort of hypervigilance where you're perhaps looking at people's gestures or their body language or something, just trying to work out the situation, work out what's going on. And I wonder sometimes whether you even create that criticism, because you're looking for it so much, you kind of find it where it isn't there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the vibes are off. No, that's exactly it. You're hyper vigilant over everybody else's expressions and so on, and you just go, the vibes are off here. Something's wrong. What is it? Oh my God, breakdown kind of mode. But yeah, okay. Natasha, what about you? How do you sort of experience RSD, if you do?
Oh, I do. Trust me. And again, I think, like Lottie said, it's things that are positive sometimes that set you off more than the negative, because you're like, but why aren't they more excited about what I've done? I've just recently finished a project at work, which was a whole comms package and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, why hasn't everyone told me how amazing it is? And it's like, that is worse in some ways than someone going, oh, can you change this and do this and add this? Because that I can do, that's clear. But just some advice that I find works and is something, because I've had to work on it a lot and I still do. And I've just recently started a new job, so I'm having to go back to my basic points of looking after myself. And something that I would recommend for everyone is the person giving you the feedback or the criticism or the comments, is it someone you respect? Is it someone you go to for advice? Because if it isn't, their feedback doesn't actually mean that much to you. And if I want critical feedback, there's certain people that I will reach out to because I trust them. they know me, but also I value their opinion, and that's really important. So if it's someone that you wouldn't necessarily bother with, why are you taking advice from them, or why is that so hurtful towards you? Maybe bear that in mind. And for teachers, just be that person that children and students want advice from. Be that supportive person. And I think that's really important, flipping it around. Be the person they can trust to ask questions, but also be careful in the questions that you ask when you want feedback.
Yeah. I think it's a funny one because it doesn't mean that we can't receive feedback. I mean, most of
No,
us
and
as educators,
I
that's all
really
we
wish
get, right?
people
Constant
could
feedback.
understand that. How many people have had a job review or an evaluation review going, is not responsive to feedback? No, I am, but I need you to understand how that feedback can be best delivered to me.
Yeah.
And how it can be structured in a way that I'm doing my best here to not burst
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
tears as you're telling me these
Yeah.
things, but
Absolutely. Yeah.
can you
Yeah.
work with me on it? I am receptive and I want feedback because I want to be better at my job or
Yeah.
my life or whatever. But there has to be a bit of an understanding of how we do feedback.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Um.
That sorry, but
Go on,
yeah,
GPP, and
that's
then I'll
one
go
of the
to you, Lottie.
sorry. There's yeah, that's it's one of the things that I had trouble with in my last job is that they gave me very little feedback, um, and it was the kind of place where you didn't really get praise when you did things well. It was just sort of expected you to do things well, and then if you screwed up, they get angry at you, right? And I know we perceive anger, but like they were genuinely angry at me, right? It was weird. It'd be one thing again, you know, because like as somebody who's a writer, like I get edited all the time, right? So I have to be receptive to feedback, right? I wrote a book and a dissertation, right? My advisor in my dissertation, she would always be like, well, Justin, I know, and well, let me explain that differently. She knew if she gave me a certain type of feedback that I would excitedly do even more than I needed to do,
Right. Yeah.
right? You know, and she never, which why I picked her. She was not someone, even if she thought that, I need to do more work on it, but that's the expectation when you're working on it, is that you're going to be doing, it's iterative. So that's fine. And the same thing when I write, you know, articles or whatever, right? People are just like, you should edit it this way, right? It's fine with me. The problem I get is when people don't seem to understand who I am under it. Obviously, reviewers, that's a little different, but I'm just saying in the sense that like I would love to be pushed a little bit to sort of improve my work, right? I always want to be pushed a little bit to improve my work. But and I don't even mind being pushed a lot to improve my work if it will make it better, right? But if you give off the implication that there's some sort of distaste for the way I've done it, not the product, but my process. Like I can't change my process. I can change the product. And if you seem to be just upset and furious about my process, then it's never going to work. Right.
Yeah. 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 It's a good point, isn't it? Because how we go about doing it might look very different to how someone else might go about doing it. But that's how we operate, right? I mean, in terms of, I mean, we're talking a lot professionally, but just before I come back to you, Lottie, I'm less affected by professional feedback than I ever was before. And I mean that's been a work in progress. I think a lot of talking to myself, kind of like Natasha described earlier. One thing that I still struggle with is in personal relationships where I perceive that somebody is a little bit annoyed, a little bit frustrated, and it might be nothing to do with me, right? It might be something else completely, but that's enough to make me burst out crying, right? I'm going to lose all my friends after this live stream, but yeah, I mean, this is something that can put pressure on somebody else who suddenly they're quite annoyed. It's about something completely different to you. It's not related to you, and then suddenly they've got me in front of them going, why are you so annoyed with me? What did I do? And that's another way that I think rejection sensitivity manifests is this kind of I think everybody's angry with me kind of feeling. This is how I experience it. I don't know if anybody else has the same issue as me. Lottie?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, spending most of your time trying to work out whether someone genuinely is angry with you or not. Yeah, I can totally appreciate that experience. And I actually agree that I quite like criticism of my professional work. It's useful and I can learn from it. And it's about something that's not me. It's about, like JPB was saying, it's the product, and I want to do as well as I can. For me, it's more something related to me personally. So I think it is in the personal relationships where it tends to come up rather than in life. I did have 2 points. I'm trying to keep them in my head. One of them was that in terms of feeling criticized, I do wonder to a degree whether that does come from the kind of criticism that we might get for being forgetful or lazy or too noisy, or all that kind of criticism you get through your life. So you're almost anticipating it.
Yeah.
Lottie, it's all part of that being too, isn't it? We're too much, too loud, too everything.
Or not enough.
Yeah. This has been one depressing episode, but yeah.
No, but never just right.
Yeah, it's just like, for example, these days it's not as big of a deal because I sort of, honestly, a lot of the people that I am friends with are professional friends. They may not be people in my literal job, although I do like my colleagues. But I mean, like, people like, you all, where it still ultimately was a professional relationship in the first place because we're in similar, like, industries and all that, right? That's how it started. Because a lot of my relationships, my personal relationships have started that way of late. We're starting from a mutual respect entry point. So it's not, people, I know my work speaks for itself to the point where, like, if you know me because you hear about my writing and all that, and then I decide to invest in a friendship with somebody, which is a choice that I make now right? Because I know most people I don't run into all that often. That has made it much easier for me not to worry about it. And also I simply had to train myself that, like, the email doesn't have any tone. Just leave it. Don't worry about it. The email. There's no emotion in the email, right? And I had to really just do that. And now it doesn't bother me that much. The only thing that still bothers me, because I don't do it very often, is if I plan something and people flake on me. That still makes me angry. I just don't plan very many things anymore. Or more accurately, I plan things where if somebody were to not show up, it wouldn't be that big of a deal, right? Like, I planned my birthday party in June, invited a bunch of people, and we were just sitting at this table for like 3-4 hours. So, like, if you were late, it was no late. It didn't matter that much, right? But like a few weeks ago, I went to karaoke with my colleagues as the whole company was together. And like a lot of like, yeah, I'm coming to karaoke, and then like just didn't show up. And this thing is like, you just clearly went home and went to sleep. It's fine, but just tell me.
Yeah,
because I was gonna see him the next day. I'm like, just tell me, right? And then my colleague said hi the next morning, and this is the only time I have been, snippy about this in the last several years, especially because for however many years we were all like at home. But I just mean, like, so she said hi, and I said no, but we're still on good terms or whatever, because there's enough of because none of these relationships were professional in the past, right? I would meet them in college or from just around, or people, or they would be people I met through dating and we've become friends or something, right? Because the entire relationship was personal, then this was the only thing that mattered. These things that would be planned or whatever, that's all there was. So when those things went poorly, there was nothing else to fall back on. Whereas if I disagree with the socialization thing that happens with a colleague, as long as it's nothing egregious and we continue to work together, well, there's a whole bunch of other stuff. So making the relationships broader and deeper is better. I think.
Yeah.
It makes it
And
easier
I
for me
think,
not to be as upset by it.
yeah, the flaking thing is some, is something, yeah, that gets to me as well. But sometimes it's because I then spiral, and I think Saskia has mentioned in the chat cognitive distortions, and she'll be able to explain more than me. Maybe she will next week if she's with us. Thanks, Saskia. But this kind of filtering a cancellation or something like that through a negative lens, like thinking, okay, well, they don't want to spend time with me, or they never intended to meet up with me in the first place, or they probably don't even like me, or probably really annoying, and then suddenly you can't get past that, and then you're back with the emotional dysregulation kind of thing going on. Anyway, I don't know. I'm gonna bring it to an end there. I think you thank you so much, all of you, for sharing such personal experiences as well. I think this is probably I don't know whether we call it an episode or the live that's, for me, is the hardest to talk about, because I think it's the one that kind of affects me a bit more. But I want to thank you for being so honest and open and sharing such personal examples. But I was just wondering if any of you would like to say anything before we leave today, or add anything. Lottie?
Sorry. I don't think it's hopeless. I mean, sometimes I do say, at some point I'm going to get tired, right? I must, because of all the things that I'm doing. At a certain point, you just don't have the energy to do all these things. But my hope is that I will have then created enough space, like years in between when I was flying off the handle more often, to where the muscle memory has shifted, right? And that's just not how I naturally react to things. And so maybe I don't have to do as much to avoid it. I'm not going to chance it right now. Then, and just, maybe when I'm 50.
Yeah. I will check in with you then and see what's going on. Lottie, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I was just thinking about reassurance as well, thinking particularly about students in the classroom. And I know that I personally, and I think this is a symptom generally of ADHD, people might ask for more reassurance and say, and I know that can sometimes be really irritating to people, that you can seem super needy. But I think when it comes to students in the classroom, it might be helpful for teachers to note that neediness might be something, some response to something like ADHD. And it's not but just reassurance, for that person to feel safe in that space.
Yeah, exactly. This is super important, actually, I think, and also personally or professionally, to have reassurance. And it's not just kind of saying, oh yeah, you're doing an amazing job, when you're not. It's about just saying, this constant checking in kind of thing. Natasha, I don't know if you wanted to add anything there before we draw to a close.
I do. I think I'd like to add in something to finish on maybe a slightly more positive note. Is we all struggle, and we all struggle daily to keep this under control. But actually, it is possible, and there are ways of doing it. And what works for us might not work for someone else, and it is trial and error. And that trial and error is a process that takes quite a lot of time. Not many people get that one thing that helps them straight away, but there are things out there, and there are methods and coping strategies and mechanisms and techniques, and finding the one that works for you. When you do find it, the difference that it will make, not necessarily straight away, but within the first few months, the difference will make such a change to your life. If you find it for a student, if you find it as your role as a teacher, there is a positive side to it as well the struggles. And when the struggles start to end, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And it's a journey.
Totally. it's about trying to find what works for you, right? And that might be something that you need a bit of help with as well from somebody else. To end on a bit of a positive then, as well. I mean, I think, you know, when Lottie and I were kind of putting this together, we were thinking a lot about how many of the ways in which ADHD manifests are not that much fun. But there are some okay things about having ADHD. You know, things that maybe make us an asset to a team or an asset to a classroom or a really good friend or a really good person to kind of have around. So in our next episode, it's the last one, at the same time next week, we'll be looking at the things that ADHDers or people with ADHD do or have, which can be seen very, very, very positively. We'd be talking about things like creativity, problem solving under pressure, things like empathy or heightened sense of justice and equity and all of this kind of stuff. So we hope you can join us next week. Thank you so much, Natasha, JPB, and of course Lottie for being with us and sharing today. We are going to be sharing some resources a little bit later on as well. So if anybody wants to check those out, you're more than welcome to do so. And thank you for your time. We hope to see you for the last one next week. See you all then.